The story of modern Chicago is born from fire. In October of 1871, we are told, a great conflagration consumed the city. For 3 days, it raged, leveling over 3 square miles of the urban core, destroying nearly 18,000 structures, and leaving a third of the population homeless. From these ashes, a new Chicago was said to have risen. A city of wood was reborn, almost overnight, into a metropolis of stone, brick, and steel, a testament to the indomitable will of its people. This is the story we are given. A heroic myth of creation, taught in schools and memorialized in monuments. But what if this story, this foundational myth of American resilience, is a fiction? What if the evidence, when examined without sentiment, tells a different tale? A tale of a timeline that is not just ambitious, but physically impossible. The official narrative of Chicago's rebirth collapses under the weight of simple mathematics and logistical reality. The story isn't just improbable. It is a calculated impossibility. In this investigation, we will not be examining legends. We will be examining the numbers, the materials, and the physical limits of the 19th century. We will deconstruct the story, piece by piece, until the truth of what happened in Chicago is revealed. To understand the anomaly, we must first look at what was supposedly there before. The Chicago of 1870, as documented in photographs and records, was a city built of haste and convenience. It was a sprawling, low-rise landscape of timber. Balloon frame construction, a fast and cheap method, was the standard. Sidewalks were wooden planks, raised above muddy streets. It was a frontier boomtown, functional and flammable. The fire, we are told, erased this world completely. And then, we are shown the result. The new Chicago. Look closely at the photographs from the 1880s and 1890s. This is not a city rebuilt in a hurry. This is a statement. Massive, ornate structures of granite and limestone dominate the skyline. The Rookery Building, the Monadnock, the Chicago Board of Trade. These are not simple replacements for wooden shops and homes. They are architectural marvels of staggering complexity and scale, designed in styles like Romanesque Revival and Beaux-Arts. Styles that speak of permanence, of empire, of centuries of accumulated wealth and skill. The question is not just how they rebuilt so fast. The question is why they rebuild like this. If your city has just been wiped out, and thousands are homeless, is the priority to construct palatial commercial blocks with intricate stone carvings and vast marble lobbies? Logic would dictate a rapid reconstruction using practical, available materials. Brick, perhaps, or even wood again, but with better planning. Instead, we see an immediate, city-wide shift to the most expensive, time-consuming, and labor-intensive form of construction imaginable. The visual evidence presents a profound contradiction. The new city does not look like it grew organically from the ashes of the old one. It looks as if it was imposed upon the landscape, fully formed. The change in material, in scale, in style, and in philosophy is too abrupt, too total. It is a visual break in the timeline. The city before the fire and the city after do not appear to belong to the same lineage, let alone the same decade. This is the first crack in the official narrative. The buildings themselves are witnesses, and they tell a story that does not align with the one we have been taught. The visual anomaly is unsettling, but the practical logistics are where the official story completely disintegrates. Let us consider the process, step by step. First, the cleanup. The fire left 4 square miles of ruin. This was not simple ash. It was a compacted layer of rubble, brick, molten metal, and collapsed foundations, all tangled together. We are asked to believe this immense field of debris was cleared in a matter of months. To do this today, with modern excavators and fleets of dump trucks, would be a monumental task. To do it in the 1870s, with horse-drawn carts and manual labor, is a task of a different magnitude entirely. The logistics of debris removal alone would have taken years, not months. But let us suspend disbelief and assume the site was cleared. Now, they must build. The new city was made of stone. Millions of tons of it. This stone did not originate in Chicago. It had to be quarried, primarily from Bedford, Indiana, and parts of Wisconsin. Think about what this means. Quarrying in the 19th century was a brutal, slow process. It involved drilling holes by hand, using black powder to blast chunks of rock free, and then slowly shaping them with hand tools. Once a block was cut, it had to be moved. We are talking about multi-ton blocks of limestone and granite. They were loaded onto wagons, taken to a railhead, hoisted onto flat cars, and then transported hundreds of miles to Chicago. The railway system of the 1870s was not designed for this. A single freight car could hold perhaps 15 to 20 tons. A single large building, like the Auditorium Theater, required over 50,000 tons of granite and limestone. Do the simple math. That is thousands of individual railcar shipments for just one building. Now multiply that by the thousands of new masonry buildings constructed in the central business district. The rail lines into Chicago would have to have been dedicated solely to this task, running 24 hours a day, every day, for years, to the exclusion of all other goods, food, and passengers. And then there is the question of labor. Where did the army of skilled craftsmen come from? Building with massive, precision-cut stone is not a job for an unskilled laborer. It requires experienced stonemasons, carvers, engineers, and architects. The 1870 census gives us a clear picture of Chicago's workforce. It does not contain a surplus of tens of thousands of master builders, waiting for a cataclysm. Did they all migrate to Chicago simultaneously? From where? Such a mass migration of specialized labor would have left a significant demographic footprint in the records, yet the data is silent. Every single stage of the process, debris removal, quarrying, transportation, and construction, presents a logistical bottleneck that the technology and infrastructure of the era could not have overcome on the timeline we are given. It is not a question of will or money. It is a question of physics, of time, of capacity. The official story asks us to believe in a miracle that defies all of them. When a narrative presents such profound logistical impossibilities, we must turn to the official records for clarification. We should expect to find detailed accounts, shipping manifests, quarry production logs, and comprehensive payrolls for this unprecedented construction effort. The largest and fastest rebuilding project of the century should, logically, be one of the best documented. But it is not. Instead, what we find is a strange and persistent silence. The official histories and contemporary newspaper accounts are heavy on poetry and light on data. They speak of the Chicago spirit, of heroic effort, and the miracle of rebirth. They describe the character of the investors and the ambition of the architects. But when it comes to the granular detail of how this was actually achieved, the records are either missing or impossibly vague. Where are the railway manifests detailing the shipment of millions of tons of stone? The primary rail lines of the era, such as the Illinois Central, should have meticulous records of such a monumental freight task. They do not. Where are the production logs from the Indiana quarries showing a sudden, exponential increase in output to meet Chicago's demand? They do not exist in the required scale. Where are the city ledgers and census supplements detailing the housing and payment of the vast army of specialized craftsmen required for the work? They are absent. The narrative we are given relies on broad, sweeping statements. Capital flowed in from the east. Laborers arrived from all over the world. These phrases are used as a substitute for evidence. They are meant to fill the gaps, to placate curiosity. It is a technique of narrative control. By focusing on the abstract spirit of the event, the official story cleverly sidesteps the impossible physical realities. It repeats the same template, over and over. A tragedy, a moment of despair, followed by a surge of human will that overcomes all obstacles. This template is emotionally satisfying, but it is not a factual account. The lack of detailed, verifiable logistical data is not a simple oversight of 19th-century bookkeeping. Other massive engineering projects of the time, like the building of the Erie Canal or the Transcontinental Railroad, are documented in excruciating detail. We know how many barrels of cement were ordered, how many cubic yards of earth were moved, how many men were on the payroll. For the rebuilding of Chicago, a project of comparable, if not greater, material scale, we have a narrative vacuum. This failure of the official record is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence. It suggests that the story we are told was constructed without a factual basis, because no such basis existed. The story was created to fit the result, not the other way around. The story of Chicago's impossible rebirth becomes even more suspect when we zoom out and realize it is not a unique event. It is a pattern, a template that repeats itself across the world in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Look at the Great Seattle Fire of 1889. The entire central business district, built primarily of wood, was destroyed. And what replaced it? Almost immediately, a new city of massive, elaborate stone and brick buildings in the Romanesque Revival style. The story is identical. A wooden city erased, a grand stone city miraculously born. Look at the Great Boston Fire of 1872, just 1 year after Chicago's. 65 acres of the downtown core, the financial district, gone. It was rebuilt in a matter of years with imposing granite and brick structures that still stand today. The speed and scale, again, defy the logistical constraints of the era. The narrative is the same. Let us consider San Francisco, 1906. An earthquake, followed by fires that burned for days. 3/4 of the city destroyed. Yet, within a decade, it is not just rebuilt, but rebuilt on a scale grander than before, with magnificent Beaux-Arts and classical structures. The Panama Pacific International Exposition of 1915 was held there to celebrate the city's rebirth, showcasing a level of construction that seems unbelievable for a city that was rubble just 9 years prior. In each instance, the formula is consistent. A destructive event, almost always a fire, provides a clean slate. The older, often wooden or modest, architecture is removed. Then, a new city appears, filled with monumental, old-world-style stone architecture, at a speed that defies the documented technological and labor capabilities of the time. This cannot be a coincidence. It is a recurring motif. The Great Fire becomes a convenient and powerful narrative tool. It explains the sudden and radical transformation of a city's landscape. It allows for the seamless introduction of a new architectural reality without having to explain its true origin. It functions as a historical reset button. When we see the same impossible story told about city after city after city, we must stop analyzing each event in isolation. We are not looking at a series of independent miracles. We are looking at a coordinated, repeated phenomenon. The question is no longer just how did they rebuild Chicago so fast? The question becomes what is the real purpose of these great fire narratives, and what are they designed to conceal? Let us move away from narrative and focus on the cold, hard logic of numbers. This is where the story cannot hide. We will perform a simple, conservative calculation. The burnt district of Chicago covered approximately 2,100 acres, or about 3.3 square miles. Within this zone, some 17,500 buildings were destroyed. Let's focus on the commercial core, which was rebuilt with stone and masonry. We'll be extremely conservative and say only 5,000 of these were substantial masonry buildings. A small, 3-story brick building requires around 100,000 bricks. A larger stone-faced commercial block can easily require thousands of tons of material. Let's use an absurdly low average of 500 tons of imported stone and brick per building. 5,000 buildings, multiplied by 500 tons each, equals 2.5 million tons of material. This is a deliberate, significant underestimate. The real number was likely 4 or 5 times higher. Now, let's analyze the transport. The average railroad freight car of the 1880s held about 20 tons. To transport 2.5 million tons of material, you would need 125,000 separate railcar shipments. The rebuilding period is generally cited as about 20 years, from 1871 to the early 1890s. 20 years is 7,300 days. To meet our conservative estimate, the rail yards of Chicago would need to receive, unload, and process an average of 17 dedicated freight cars of stone and brick, every single day, for 20 consecutive years. This does not include weekends, holidays, or winter days when construction would slow or stop. And remember, this is on top of the trains needed to carry lumber, steel, food for a growing population, commercial goods, and passengers. The rail infrastructure would have been choked. Now, consider the labor. Quarrying limestone with 19th-century tools was slow. A team of men might produce a few tons per day. To produce the millions of tons required would necessitate a quarrying operation of unprecedented scale, running constantly. Let's say it takes 20 man-hours to quarry, finish, and prepare 1 ton of stone for transport. For our 2.5 million tons, that is 50 million man-hours of quarry work alone. This does not count transportation, site preparation, or the skilled masons needed to actually place the stone. Chicago's total population in 1870 was under 300,000. The entire male workforce was a fraction of that. The numbers demand a workforce and a logistical capacity that did not exist. It's not that it was difficult. It's that it violates the mathematical and physical constraints of the time. The equation does not balance. The official story is numerically illiterate. It presents a conclusion, a rebuilt city, without any workable formula to achieve it. The numbers do not lie, and they tell us that the story we know is false. If the official narrative is a logistical impossibility, then we are obligated to form a new hypothesis that fits the available evidence. This requires no appeal to fantasy or exotic technology. It requires only that we question the initial premise, that the city was built from scratch after the fire. Let us propose a more logical, albeit unsettling, alternative. The hypothesis is this: the grand, monumental stone core of Chicago was already there before 1871. The city that burned was not the entire city. The fire was an event that primarily destroyed the newer, more flammable wooden structures that had been built up around and in between a pre-existing, older stone infrastructure. The Great Fire was not a blank slate event, it was a site-clearing event. This hypothesis elegantly solves all of the logistical problems. The speed of the rebuilding is no longer impossible, because the primary task was not building, but rather clearing, repairing, and renovating. The massive stone structures, which would have taken decades to construct, were already in place. They may have been damaged by the fire, scorched, in need of new roofs and interiors, but their fundamental structure survived. This is consistent with many photographs of the aftermath, which show lone stone walls and building shells standing amidst a sea of ash. The official story calls them survivors. This hypothesis suggests they were the norm, the foundational layer of the city. This model also explains the sudden appearance of advanced architecture. The buildings were not designed and built in a rush by a fledgling city, they were inherited. The Chicago School of Architecture may not have been an invention, but a rediscovery or adaptation of the immense structures they found themselves in possession of. The missing logistical records are no longer a mystery. There was no need for millions of tons of new quarry stone because the stone was already there. There was no need for a phantom army of master builders because the most difficult work had already been done. The story of the Great Fire then becomes a powerful creation myth. A story crafted to explain the transition of the city from one state to another, and to assign ownership of this incredible infrastructure to the pioneers of the late 19th century. It is a story of appropriation. By claiming to have built this grand city from the ashes in 2 decades, they laid claim to a legacy far greater than their own. It is a controlled, logical explanation that requires no miracles. It only requires us to accept that the history we have been taught is not the history that happened. We are left with a profound disconnect between the story we are told and the evidence that remains. The official history of Chicago's rebirth is a tale of heroic triumph over adversity. But the numbers tell a story of logistical impossibility. The architecture tells a story of a sudden, inexplicable transformation. The archives tell a story of missing evidence where detailed records should be. And the global pattern tells us that Chicago was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger, unexplained phenomenon. The story of the Great Fire serves a purpose. It provides a simple, emotionally resonant explanation for a complex and uncomfortable reality. It papers over the cracks in our history, and it asks us to believe in a miracle rather than question the foundation of the story itself. But belief is not a substitute for evidence. Once you begin to scrutinize the foundational myths of our cities, you start to see the inconsistencies everywhere. The timeline that doesn't fit. The construction that defies the technology of its day. The stories that feel more like legends than historical accounts. If they could fabricate a narrative on this scale, for a city as prominent as Chicago, what other parts of our accepted history are equally fragile? What else have we been taught that does not stand up to simple, rational scrutiny? The answers are not hidden away in secret archives. They are written in the stone of the buildings you walk past every day. They are present in the silence of the official records. The evidence is in plain sight. You only need to learn how to look. The patterns are there for those willing to see them. If you find value in this method of investigation, and wish to continue questioning the stories we have been given, you know what to do.